Welcome to Canada's Entrepreneur, where we talk to the entrepreneurs who are making it happen across Canada and deliver the news, trends, knowledge, and opinions from entrepreneurs and business influencers across the country.
Hi, this is Celine Williams, hosting from Ontario for Canada's Entrepreneur. My guests today are the co-founders of Bridge Medical Communications, Lorie Spence and Carolyn Pritchard. Their vision is to empower healthcare professionals to optimize patient outcomes through innovative communication tools, creativity, and strategic collaboration. Welcome, Lorie and Carolyn.
Thank you, Celine. We're excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you, not only because I love when I get to talk to two people and two co-founders at once. It's kind of my favorite. But I'm really curious about how you got to this very specific field niche in communications. So I'd love to hear a little bit about each of your journeys as entrepreneurs and how you came together. And Lorie, since you're top left for me, if you'd like to start.
Excellent. Starting out as entrepreneurs, ironically, Carolyn and I have known each other for a number of years, and our journey actually started working together at a global agency. And it was during that time that we were really trying to identify our next opportunity. And entrepreneurship seemed like the logical choice. However, it was a little bit scary. So I think that's where the co-foundership came in. And as we started to plan and look to what that would be, a co-founder model for moving forward into something that we could offer in medical communications that wasn't existing was where we really wanted to go. And I know Carolyn gets really excited talking about the opportunity and what we provided to that niche. So I'll let Carolyn continue on where that goes.
Thanks, Lorie. And thanks, Celine, for having us today. I would say very early in my education, my mother was someone who really wanted me to be a nurse. Her mother was a nurse. And I felt that there was more opportunity than bedside nursing. And I had joined the Canadian Armed Forces militia as a medic before university to get a sense of that. And from there, I worked in a hospital for about 3 years, met a surgeon that had his own gait analysis and orthotic company. And it was there that, I decided to depart from traditional nursing and go into more of a business setting. But it wasn't until, as Lorie said, that we met working in a healthcare agency that I really thought that there was an opportunity to go out on our own and form our own business. And I think part of that was Lorie doing her MBA part-time while we worked at that agency. She kept bringing ideas forward and, through her learnings through that program.
So I'm gonna take a step back a little bit and ask a question. The agents, because the everyone's journey to what they're doing now, especially as an entrepreneur, is really different, right? And so when you say you met at an agency, was it a tradition? Like, what kind of agency? Because I do recognize also there are agencies that focus on communication. There's some that focus on healthcare service. Like, there's so many different kind of niches. Mm-hmm. So I know our audience would love to hear a little bit more about where that came from and how that came together and how you connected there. And Lorie, I don't know if your background is also in healthcare in some way, shape, or form or not. So I'd be curious about that as well.
Absolutely. So my background actually started in communications in the healthcare setting. So I've always worked on agency side. And when you're speaking of agency, I've worked in boutique agencies as well as larger global agencies, and always in a communications capacity. So when Carolyn and I met and worked together at a global agency, it was an agency that had different sub offerings, and we were in the specific niched area of communications for healthcare practitioners. So they did have advertising, they did have PR, other channels. We were focused directly on the medical communications piece. So it was within that we were really focused, and I think that's where we saw the opportunity for a boutique offering in Canada versus the global offering that typically was coming into the marketplace.
Well, and I'm curious, I would imagine that there is a difference in how communicate, I'm going to say healthcare communications, but how that works in Canada, especially because it is a universal healthcare system and it's not a for-profit model the way it is in some other places. How does that compare, or what is how do you assess, maybe is a better, how do you assess an opportunity like that where there's people who are going to be like, oh, it's universal healthcare. This seems like a thing that's not, it's not, maybe not as big an opportunity as it might be somewhere else. And clearly it is. And there's entrepreneurs who don't know how to assess or where to assess or what to do with that. And I'm curious how you did that and how where you saw the opportunity, or what flagged it as an opportunity for you.
We saw the opportunity in Canada specifically based on our experience. So as Carolyn alluded to, having a nursing background in the Canadian marketplace, as well as myself working in agency, we had a number of Canadian clients that we'd already built relationships with. And as an entrepreneur, relationship building and networking is really critical to expanding who you work with, as well as we were also working with a number of healthcare providers. So our network was not just professionals in the healthcare space, but also in the pharmaceutical and biotech space. So that was really what gave us probably a lot of the confidence in moving into our own agency space versus the global that maybe didn't have I'll call them boots on the ground, the network and relationships that we built over our probably first 10 years of our careers through other capacities. And that's what we were really able to leverage in starting the co-founder model that we did with Bridge.
And I appreciate the networking piece, because I think that is so important, and it helps us see the opportunities. We don't always talk about that. And so, Carolyn, I'm going to ask this to you because I'm curious, having a healthcare background, I also recognize communications, but coming from that more of that healthcare background or interest, and Lorie coming from the communications kind of education and background, I would imagine there's some wonderful balance that happens because of that, and some unique challenges because perspectives are quite different, even if you're working in the same space. So, Carolyn, I'm going to start with you this time. What has worked, not worked? What have you learned? What would you do differently or the same in this co-founder space? And Lorie, I'm going to ask you the same thing in a second.
I think reflecting on, that co-founder partnership, I would say in the early days, we did come from different backgrounds, as you've mentioned, with the communications and more of the business background that Lorie had, and mine being healthcare. And I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. So I think, our backgrounds complemented one another, but I also think that our skill set, and we really looked at our values as we became co-founders to determine if we were aligned on, what that business would look like. And our core values within Bridge Medical align to our personal values. And I think, knowledge and excellence are just two of them that keep us, and I would say innovation, that Lorie might speak to more, but keeping us ahead of the curve in our business.
Yeah, thank you. Lorie?
I think one of the things when it comes to assessing challenges and, a model to work together, it became clear, and I think this is in any partnership relationship, is having clear sets of guidelines to work against. And so that's one of the things as co-founders we were probably a little bit more stringent on, is what we agreed to do, and all decisions we made were for the business. Nothing was personal. It doesn't mean personal opinions and feelings don't get in the way. We are human. However, at the end of the day, we had to make decisions according to the business. And I think having that as our guiding light has been really helpful when we would get into areas of potential, conflict or disagreement. We would have to unpack it and say, what's the best decision for the business? And that always took the onus off of one person being right or wrong, but ultimately that we were both aligned on what's the best outcome. And I think as a co-founder, you're probably putting that in place a little bit more formally than maybe as a sole entrepreneur, because you have no one challenging you. So your decision's final all the way through. But I think that challenging is really helpful to also evaluate if each decision has merit as well. And that's been something that we've been able to navigate all the way through, and was something we set up very early to be able to manage through that, because we knew conflict or tough decisions were going to be inevitable as a partnership, and we wanted to have a way to navigate forward.
And I think it's a great lesson, because we oftentimes, if co-founders get to the point where they have something like that set up, it's out of necessity because they're dealing with ongoing conflict, or they're not able to get to decisions where there's alignment, right? Doesn't have to be agreement. That's not always the way, but alignment around what you're moving towards. And so I think it's really inspiring that it sounds like it was less about, we have all this conflict and challenge and we're doing this because we have to. And it was more future focused, right? More of a strategic decision. This is what we're going to do because we're humans and we know that conflict will come and disagreement will come.
Mm-hmm. It's really important that you highlight that too, Celine, of that being our guiding post, because even now as we move forward, you grow, you expand, you scale, you have to have that area to make those decisions. And, do we hire or not hire? Is this the right person to hire or not hire? Do we offer this new offering or not? It's tying it back to the business outcome versus it being, oh, I really like this idea and it's great, but is it really the best thing at the time?
I think entrepreneurs, I find those bright, shiny areas to go, and we definitely have been in that situation. And I think, to Lorie's point, we come back to, okay, well, let's stay focused on what we're doing now and how it's aligning to our current business.
So is there and noting that this, I'm not saying there's an easy answer to this. So I'm fully acknowledging that what I'm about to ask may be a bit complex to explain, but is there a decision tree model that you use, or a way that you even approach the conversation if there is a potential misalignment, or if it's a big decision, like, do we expand this team, hire more people, whatever the case may be? And the context of why I ask that is that I think oftentimes people hear, oh, they have this guiding light, this, a set of values, and I'd be very curious what your values are as well, that they kind of make these decisions from. But what does it really look like in action?
Yes. So the framework that we use is probably based on having more of the business background and being able to use that for decision making and taking the emotion out of that piece. And so we still have to evaluate, what's the benefit, what's the cost, and doing it in a bit more of a pragmatic order to then evaluate it. So does it make economical sense? Does it make sense for where we need to go? Is it the right investment? And so we do go through that process, and we have set that up from the beginning as part of our structure of decision making. And don't just say, well, it's your decision. We've never really relied to say, oh, in the place to say you're fully accountable or you're fully, out on a limb, because I think it's really important that the reason we're co-founders is to take both the risk out, but also to be supportive in the decision, that you feel like it's a solid decision. And I think two guts are probably better than one. And also putting the pragmatic rigor behind the decision making is really how we've worked through that. And it doesn't mean you don't like maybe the decision because it wasn't yours, but at the end of the day, if it had that rigor around the process, you can't disagree with how it was achieved. And maybe, Carolyn, do you want to highlight our values?
Yes, definitely. I think I had mentioned knowledge. So constantly learning, that's something that, whether it be Lorie is in a mastermind group, formal, taking courses, networking, attending conferences, always, looking for that opportunity, especially when you're an entrepreneur, that you need to take an effort towards that knowledge because it's not coming necessarily to you. And excellence. So everything we do for our clients, is at the highest level of achievement. Methodical is also in medical communications a really important value that we're doing things within regulations and guidelines. We have accountability to ensure, for our team, everybody's accountable to the company and to the clients. And we also have wellness as one of the core values that we added probably 5 years or more ago, that it's really, important for our employees working in healthcare to take that as a high value.
And thank you for sharing those. I think it's always beneficial for people to hear different values and how they're laid out and what they mean. So to what you said earlier, they're aligned with your own values, even if you personally might phrase it differently. There's an alignment there, and then that helps, which is almost always the case with whether it's a founder or co-founders. And then that helps it be kind of the living, breathing experience of being in your company. So I appreciate that. And besides an alignment of values between the two of you, what are some of the best parts of having a co-founder that you might not experience if you were a solo entrepreneur?
I can start with that. Some of the best parts for me are really having somebody to inspire and compliment you. So I think one of my areas tends to be, as Carolyn said, going into the knowledge, but sometimes you need that spark and that, what's bringing those ideas forward. And that's really where Carolyn brings a lot of that in. She's always tapping into networks, ideas. Sometimes they may be outside of what we currently think, but she's always trying to push the envelope to see what can invigorate our innovation. And so that for me is really something I'm grateful for, because as you know, you only have so much capacity within your realm. And so you cannot do all of those things at all the time. And I think that's the piece of being a little bit humble of, I wish I could do all of our values every day at, X%, but the reality is you can only perform so much, and having somebody being able to bring that other piece to the partnership is really great.
I appreciate that. Carolyn?
Well, a very simple benefit of having a co-founder is taking time off and knowing somebody else is there and can respond to anything that's happening. And in agency life and in I suppose healthcare communication, it's very dynamic. And so adaptability, also one of our core values, that, to be able to take a week off and know that Lorie's there, that's an amazing feeling. I think also the collaboration with somebody and not having to make every decision on your own. And I know that maybe as a sole entrepreneur, you might have a board, but as a smaller business, as you're growing and expanding into your business, having the co-founder, I couldn't imagine doing it totally independent. And maybe that's from my background, not having a business degree, more of a healthcare degree, but I really appreciate that.
And I love that you mentioned that having a co-founder allows you to take time off, because I don't think anyone becomes an entrepreneur in whatever capacity thinking, I'm doing this so I have no freedom, so that I have no ability to take time off. And yet that happens so often.
Yes. And I think that's something that if we were going to communicate to a broader audience, like that is something that to think about, right? That the value, there's a huge advantage of having a co-founder in planning, and it's not just the immediate, maybe first couple of years that you're starting the business, but it's, we're 14 years, and I see, greater opportunity now because we have our more defined roles and responsibilities. Um, and there's nobody else in an organization that's going to be as accountable as the founders.
It's true. That is very true.
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned roles and responsibilities, and I'm going to ask a question around that is, so was that something that you set up clearly at the beginning, which I
No.
So I'm asking that. I was going to say I recognize that's often not the case. And since the answer is no, how did that come about? And what was the impetus behind it? Because I'm going to acknowledge, based on the work that I do, I am like, clarity to me is so, so, so important. And I talk about and encourage it all the time. Even on these podcast interviews, I'm like, clarity, clarity. And roles and responsibilities is often a place, especially in smaller companies as they're growing, where it's like, just kind of kind of do everything and we'll sort it out until something happens. So I'm not saying something happened, but I'm curious how that came to be, because I know it can be complex.
Yeah, our defining our roles and responsibilities has definitely been an ebb and flow as the business has evolved.
Yeah.
I think in the beginning, we tried to set up our roles and responsibilities based on skill set, which seemed very logical. However, there's also things around capacity and, just because that's your skill, is that 80% of the business or is that 10% of the business? So I think we had to do some reevaluation. And I think that's normal when, co-founders come together. And I think in partnerships, a lot of times it's complementary skill setting that people start to define their roles and responsibilities. But it probably took us about the first 5 years to evolve that to roles and responsibilities aligned to the business delivery and operations versus our skill set. And that also required us to grow and stretch in some of our skills to be able to take those roles on. And I think that's really been an important thing that we've evolved at every season of our business as we've gone through. As you know, you scale, you plateau, you scale again, you plateau. Each time we change roles and responsibilities, and what we had 5 years ago is not what we have today. And I'm anticipating what we have in the next 5 years isn't going to be where we are today either.
Yeah. Carolyn, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say, as the roles and responsibilities get defined more clearly, it's very helpful for the team that you're working with. Because prior to that, as co-founders, the decision making was, we both were involved in the decision making, but maybe the team didn't know where to go for the answer. And it just streamlines it now. So I think depending on the type of business for entrepreneurs, if they're able to define at least a portion of their responsibility early on, that's probably a benefit.
Yeah, I think that's great advice and extremely true. So you mentioned the importance of having a network, not building out the network, but the network, the importance of your network in getting this started. Let's put it that way. I imagine that, especially at 14 years, congratulations, by the way, that the landscape around you has changed like it has for pretty much every industry that exists right now. And so I'm curious how you continue to focus, build, use your network, what has been valuable to you or not valuable to you in that way. And I will acknowledge that one of the things that I hear a lot, even in these interviews, is that post-COVID, there's just not as much happening and people feel weird reaching out to their network or they don't know what to, there's a lot of talk around that. In person is coming back. In person isn't coming back. There, it's all over the place. And I think, it's very clear that what you have done and are continuing to do is serving you. And so I'd be curious if you had advice around growing, building, maintaining a network, if there's things that you highly recommend or do not recommend to people, what any of that might be.
I can start with that, Celine.
Yeah.
As Carolyn mentioned, one of our values is collaboration. And so I think that's why we really much value our network and building it out. And when we started, obviously, it was a much smaller network with the two of us. And we continue to delve in that. And probably where we're connected now as more senior leaders in the industry, which we really strive to keep those relationships fostered. However, as we continue to grow and bring our team in and grow our team, that's one of the things that we really encourage our team members to do is build their own network and collaboration so that they can have that same value. And I think it's important as people grow and evolve in their industry that they have their own brand, they have their own network, and that's something that they can leverage, whether it's with Bridge or, somewhere else. But I think it's really important that usually comes back full circle. And so it's something we really encourage for our team, and not to work in isolation, and take those opportunities to foster those relationships, whether they be with providers or clients.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I love networking. I think this is something that can also be fun and enjoyable. And I find now around the city in Toronto, there are a lot of female, women-focused business activities. So we've been attending a few of those more recently, post-COVID, as you mentioned. Uninterrupted is one of them, where you can join as a member as well. Last week, Lorie and I attended, it's called Work the Room. So there's a lot of corporations that are supporting women in business to be at these events, but I think there's high value in entrepreneurs also, investing in themselves and attending and networking, or at least seeing what the trends are. I think networking in your industry is really important through LinkedIn. And I would say, a couple things that we've initiated ourselves. One of them most recently was called Her Seat at the Table. So as two female founders, we invited industry partners of senior executives to come and share their experience with other professionals. So I think, now having more experience and I guess with our business, just giving back in that way.
I love that. And I think that's great advice. And I think it's wonderful that you also acknowledge, Carolyn, that you love networking, because so many people are like, oh, networking. And so it's nice when someone is like, no, I love it. And here's some of the things I do. So I think that is really important for people to hear. And I would note that you mentioned earlier that Lorie, you're in like a mastermind group, for example. That's another way of networking. If going to an event and meeting a bunch of strangers isn't your thing, right? And Lorie, I'm not saying it isn't your thing, but if for someone who is like, oh God, I can't imagine going into a room of strangers, something like a mastermind that you're a part of would be another opportunity.
Absolutely. I think it's finding those networking opportunities fit with both your schedule and probably with what brings you, lights you up as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I want to, before we wrap this up, I want to give you the opportunity, each of you, if there's something that that we didn't get to that you want to say, especially around partnership, because we spent a lot of time talking about being co-founders, which I very much appreciate. And I know people always love to hear that. If there's something that we didn't get to that you want to say, or perhaps something that you just wanted to emphasize and kind of leave as like here's a pin in this for anyone listening or watching, I want to give you the opportunity each of you the opportunity to do that. Lorie, if again, top left, if you would like to start, you're more than welcome.
Certainly. I think, after 14 years of a co-founder model and having an entrepreneurial business, I think one of the things that's really important for me to put forward is how excited I still am about the business and the opportunity and keeping it evolving. And so where we started 14 years ago is not where we are today, which allowed us to navigate. And I think if you're motivated and excited around being able to be in charge of your destiny and respond to something that you can put a value proposition out there for is really incredible. I think one of the things that we're probably really proud of is as we continue to evolve as co-founders is giving more and more back, not just to, as Carolyn mentioned, her seat at the table, but we recently launched a women's health symposium called Empower Her. And, we really want to lift and people up, especially female, practitioners, leaders, all of that. And this was an opportunity for us to do that. So that's what excites us, is continuing to be able to build on what we've done in the past, but be able to, make strides forward in things that are a lot more exciting. And I think a lot of times when you start an entrepreneurial business, that first, startup phase is so exciting because it's so there. And I think that first plateau, people can sometimes say, oh, what are we in this for? But I think having that constant idea to innovate and, go forward is definitely something that lights me up and, keeps me excited about where we're going, at least for the next 5 to 10 years.
I love that. Carolyn?
I would say that, often you hear mentorship, and I think as an entrepreneur, it's also really, I think, an opportunity to share your experience with younger people. And we've more recently been having more students come and work at our agency from the life sciences industry. And I think just being able to share and help them build confidence in what they're doing, because I do believe with the femtech boom, there are so many opportunities, and we need people to take that initiative and become an entrepreneur and take the lead to bring innovation to the marketplace. So definitely, I would say informal mentorship as well as formalized.
Yeah, great distinction. And I think we focus on one, not the other quite often. So thank you for mentioning both. And thank you both for being a guest on the podcast today. It was lovely talking with you. And for anyone who is listening or watching, you can find Lorie and Carolyn on LinkedIn with their names, Lorie Spence and Carolyn Pritchard. And you can also check out bridgemedcoms.com. And there will be links to everything in the show notes. And thank you for listening to Canada's Entrepreneur. Like, comment, and subscribe to all our channels to get the latest podcasts from entrepreneurs across Canada.